The wind whispered low through the tall pines as the sun stretched its golden arms across Arlington National Cemetery, casting long shadows over rows of gleaming white headstones. Among the morning silence, a figure emerged at the gates, a stooped old man, his back curved by time and battles fought both abroad and within. He wore a faded olive-green uniform, creased and patched, its medals long removed but not forgotten. His boots, cracked and dulled by decades of wear, carried the weight of stories no one had asked to hear. In his calloused hands, he held a single white carnation, its petals trembling in the breeze, much like the man himself. His name was Albert Moore, though no one at the gate asked. As he stepped forward, trying to pass the iron fence toward the funeral grounds, a young military police officer raised a hand to stop him. "Sir, this is a private ceremony. Do you have clearance or a guest badge?" Albert paused, eyes clouded with something far older than age. Memories. His voice, when it came, was soft but steady. "No, son. I'm just here to say goodbye." The officer, bound by protocol more than cruelty, offered a polite shake of the head. "I'm sorry, sir. This service is for General Gregory Lawson. Only immediate guests and dignitaries are allowed past this point." Albert nodded once, the lines on his face deepening as he stepped back without protest. He didn't argue. He didn't explain. He merely moved to the side of the gate, settling near the shadows of the wall, as if he belonged to them. There he stood silently, the flower still in his grip, watching as black cars rolled in one by one, delivering senators, generals, and men with perfect salutes but no memory of the jungles of Kisan. They passed him without a glance. His uniform, once a symbol of honor, now seemed invisible. No one asked him why he was there. No one asked what he'd seen, or what he'd given up so that others could wear the shining brass they flaunted so proudly today. And yet Albert did not leave. He didn't come for the crowd or the spectacle. He came for the man in the coffin, the man he once pulled from the blood-soaked mud of Vietnam, under mortar fire and screams. The man who had promised, with a hand pressed to a bleeding side, that he would never forget the face of the soldier who carried him to life. Albert had never expected thanks. He had never asked for a medal or his name in a book. All he had wanted was peace. But today, something had pulled him from the quiet of his small apartment, from the shelf where the only photograph of his unit still stood. Something told him he had to come. Even if no one else remembered him, even if he had to say goodbye from the shadows. The white carnation trembled again in his hand, this time not from the wind, but from the old soldier's grip, tightening as the sound of taps began in the distance. Each note pierced the morning stillness, echoing across the cemetery like voices calling out names long since swallowed by time. Albert stood straight. Despite the ache in his knees, despite the years, he raised his hand to his brow in a silent salute. No one noticed, but that didn't matter. He wasn't saluting the rank or the ritual. He was saluting a memory. He was saluting a promise kept. And though the gate still stood closed, nothing, not the iron, not the silence, not even time, could truly keep him out. Not where it mattered. Not in the heart. The rain had come suddenly that afternoon, drenching the marble paths of Arlington in a quiet curtain of sorrow. Visitors scattered beneath umbrellas and coats, but the old soldier did not move. Albert Moore remained near the gate, soaked through, the white carnation now limp in his trembling hand, its petals bruised, much like the heart that carried it. The last note of taps had faded, replaced by the distant hum of engines as the mourners departed, their shoes dry, their eyes hidden behind dark glasses. He had begun to turn away, convinced this moment was not his to claim, when a voice called out softly behind him, uncertain, tentative, and tinged with disbelief. "Albert!" It was not a voice he expected. Not here. Not after all these years. He turned slowly, unsure if it was real or a trick of memory, the kind that sometimes whispered to him in dreams. But she was there, standing beneath a shared black umbrella with a younger man in a pressed suit beside her. Time had changed her. It had softened her once fiery hair to silver strands, deepened the creases around her mouth, but he would have known her anywhere. Helen. She stepped forward, her umbrella forgotten, as if the rain itself no longer mattered. Her eyes, still sharp with the fire of a younger woman who had once faced down war with nothing but a nurse's badge and a steel spine, searched his face. "I can't believe it. I thought you were gone." He didn't speak at first. His voice caught somewhere between his ribs and the 20 years since they last stood face to face. "I didn't know he'd passed. I only saw the obituary yesterday. Something told me I had to come." She nodded, biting her lip, blinking back a flood she wasn't willing to let fall. "Gregory never forgot you, you know. He looked for you for years. After the war, after the promotions, after everything. He said he owed his life to a man whose name he never learned properly." "I didn't think he remembered," Albert said, almost to himself. "He was barely conscious. I didn't expect," he trailed off, unsure what he'd expected. "Not this. Not her." The young man stepped closer, looking between them with quiet curiosity. Helen turned toward him, her voice gentle. "This is my son, Michael." Albert's eyes widened slightly, not from surprise at the name, but from the shape of the boy's jaw, the unmistakable trace of Gregory's fire and Helen's poise. He offered a stiff nod. Michael extended a hand. "I've heard stories about you," the young man said. "My father didn't remember your name. He just called you the ghost who carried me out of hell. He said you disappeared before the choppers arrived. I always thought maybe he'd made it up, like some war legend." Albert gave a faint smile the first that day. "Sometimes it felt like I was a ghost. Sometimes it still does." The rain softened into a mist, and for a moment they simply stood there. 3 lives bound by war, memory, and a reunion no one had planned. Helen stepped closer, placing a warm, firm hand on Albert's forearm. "Come with us," she said quietly. "We're going to the reception. You should be there. You saved his life. That makes you family, whether anyone else understands it or not." Albert hesitated. His boots were soaked. His hands were weathered and bare. He had no medals, no formal invitation, no polished words to offer. But when he looked into Helen's eyes and saw the honest ache there, saw the years fold away for just a moment, he nodded. And when they walked away from the cemetery gate, side by side beneath the same umbrella, it felt like something had come full circle. Not all wounds bleed. Some simply wait, silent and unseen, until a single moment, a single voice, reminds them they are still remembered. The carnation, now crushed and faded, remained clutched in Albert's hand. It had been meant for a grave. But now, perhaps, it would find a place among the living. The room smelled faintly of old wood, cigars, and faded memories. A warm fire crackled in the stone hearth, but its glow did little to chase the chill that clung to Albert Moore's bones. He sat quietly in the corner of the library, his palms resting on his knees, the lines of his face carved deep with the weight of years, of things never said and roads never taken. Around him, conversations murmured like soft currents. Officers in starched uniforms, family members of the late General Lawson, friends who hadn't known the man beyond the medals and eulogies. Albert said nothing. He didn't belong in their stories. He belonged to something quieter, older, buried beneath jungle canopies and a rain of mortar shells that had never stopped falling in the back of his mind. Helen brought him a cup of coffee, her hand brushing his as she set it down beside him. "You should talk to Michael," she said gently. "There's something he wants to show you. Something Gregory left for you." Her voice trembled on his name. Even now, she still hadn't quite learned to say was instead of is. Albert only nodded, the way men do when they've been asked to face ghosts. Michael approached minutes later, holding a small lockbox made of dark cedar, its brass latch tarnished and worn. He knelt beside Albert without ceremony, without the stiff politeness of earlier. Now, he looked like a son holding a piece of his father that still pulsed with unspoken truth. "He left this with me last year," Michael said. "Told me to give it to someone if he ever came." Albert frowned slightly. How'd he know I would? Michael gave a small, crooked smile. He didn't. But he said, if he's out there, if that old bastard still breathes, he'll come when it matters. He paused. Guess he was right. The latch clicked open, and Michael handed Albert a bundle of letters, a worn photograph of 4 young soldiers, including himself and a bloodied Gregory, and at the bottom, a single envelope marked only with the words, "Final orders, for Albert Moore." Albert's hands shook as he opened it, eyes scanning the slanted handwriting, so familiar it cut like shrapnel through his chest. If you're reading this, then I'm finally out of time. Hell of a way to send a letter, I know. You always hated paperwork. You saved my life once. Not just my body, but everything I became after. My stars, my family, my legacy. All of it, I owe to a man who vanished into the smoke before I could even thank him. This country made me a general, but you made me a man. You showed me what courage looks like when no one's watching. And now, I've got one last favor to ask. Find him. His name's Daniel Reyes. Radio tech. You remember? Freckles, shaky hands, voice like a scared kid. We thought he died out there, but I found out years later that he survived. The truth is, he's been in a VA psych ward in Missouri for over 4 decades. No visitors. No family. No one. I never made it to him. I was too busy being a hero. But you were always the one who cared. The one who carried us. I want you to find him, Al. Sit with him. Talk to him. Tell him he wasn't forgotten. Tell him he mattered. That's my final order. From one ghost to another. Reg. The paper trembled in Albert's hands, not from the draft in the room, but from the storm inside his chest that had broken loose. He pressed it against his knee, closed his eyes, and let the silence fall over him like a shroud. Then, slowly, he looked up at Michael and nodded. When can we leave? The road to Missouri was long and quiet. Albert didn't speak much. He stared out the window, watching the passing fields blur like lost years, feeling the weight of something awakening inside him. This wasn't just duty. It wasn't closure. It was something deeper. Something like redemption. When they reached the hospital, the nurse led him down a narrow corridor, the smell of antiseptic and forgotten lives thick in the air. Daniel's room was small, sterile, dimly lit. The man inside barely resembled the boy Albert remembered, a thin, pale figure with eyes that flickered with half-light and fear. He sat hunched over a chessboard, playing against no one, whispering numbers under his breath. Albert stepped inside quietly, the way one enters a chapel. "Daniel," he said softly. "Daniel Reyes." The man looked up, startled, then narrowed his eyes, searching. "Do I know you?" Albert took a seat across from him, placing the letter gently on the table between them. "No," he said. "But I knew you. And someone who loved you very much asked me to be here." Daniel stared at the letter, then at Albert, and something in his face began to melt, slowly like frost giving way to spring. A tear slid down his cheek, as though someone had finally remembered to turn on the sun. They spoke for hours. About nothing and everything. About war and silence, fear and forgiveness. And in that tiny room, among peeling paint and flickering lights, 2 ghosts shared a warmth that had eluded them both for decades. Albert Moore had walked into that place as a relic of the past. He left as something more, a messenger, a witness, a brother restored. It wasn't the mission he expected at the end of his life, but it was the one that mattered most. The wheels of the old bus hummed steadily along the lonely stretch of Highway 9, cutting through the mist-covered hills of Quang Tri Province. The landscape had changed. Time had softened the scars, greened the bare hills, and buried the red mud under layers of new life. But Albert Moore saw it all as it had been in 1968. Every bend in the road, every shadow beneath the trees whispered a memory. He sat by the window, hands clasped over his knee, a silent soldier in civilian clothes, staring out at ghosts only he could see. He hadn't planned to come back. He never wanted to. For years, he told himself it was better to leave the past buried, to honor the dead by forgetting the jungle and the blood and the cries that never made it to the radio. But Gregory's letter had opened something. A wound. A door. Maybe both. When he visited Daniel Reyes, and saw the broken boy still trapped in a memory loop of numbers and static, he knew. He couldn't outrun it any longer. He had to return, not for answers but to say the things that had drowned in silence for too long. The bus dropped him off near what had once been the Key San combat base. Now it was just a museum. Concrete remnants, a rusted Huey helicopter on stilts, a few old bunkers left to the jungle. The air was different here, thicker somehow, as if the very oxygen remembered what had happened. Albert walked slowly, his boots crunching on gravel, and stopped at the edge of the old runway. A single wildflower grew through a crack in the asphalt. Yellow. Defiant. He knelt there for a moment, brushing his fingers over the petals. And then it came, not like a flashback but like a wave. They had been pinned down for 3 days in that ditch at the edge of the perimeter. The rain never stopped. Mortar fire screamed overhead like devils howling in foreign tongues. Men cried out in English and Vietnamese, in prayer and in curses, and the mud swallowed everything. Boots, bullets, and the hope of ever seeing sunlight again. Albert remembered the heat of Gregory's blood soaking through his shirt, remembered dragging him through the trench, whispering, stay with me, over and over like a sacred chant. He remembered Daniel's voice crackling through the busted radio, trying to call in a medevac with shaking hands, even as the antenna sparked against the rain. And he remembered the boy, Billy Myers, from Iowa, carried a photo of a girl in his helmet, took a bullet through the neck and died in Albert's arms, choking on his own fear. Albert rose from the cracked earth and wandered further, to the remnants of the northern wall. He found a patch of grass where he'd once stood watch on a moonless night, clutching a rifle with blistered hands, unsure if the next second would bring death or silence. He sat there, let the wind move through his hair, and let himself speak out loud for the first time in decades. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice ragged. For all of it. For living when you didn't. For forgetting your names. For making it home and doing nothing with it for so long. Tears came, not loud or dramatic, but slow and relentless. They cut paths through the dust on his face and fell into the soil like offerings. He didn't wipe them away. From his jacket, he pulled out the final thing Gregory had given him. An old dog tag, bent and blackened, the name almost worn off. Billy's. Somehow, the general had held on to it all those years, waiting for the right hands to carry it back. Albert placed it gently at the base of the bunker wall, pressed it into the dirt beside the wildflower. As the sun dipped low over the Laotian border, the light turned gold and the jungle quieted. Albert stood, shoulders straighter now, a strange peace settling into the cracks of his grief. He looked back once more at the old runway, at the wreckage and the weeds, and he smiled, a tired, weathered smile. You're not forgotten, he said. And this time he believed it. The airport was a place of transition. Suitcases rolled like distant thunder. Children chased each other around terminal benches. The voice over the intercom called out destinations with sterile clarity. But for Albert Moore, everything blurred into silence. He sat by gate 47, an old man with a cane and a satchel worn by war and years, watching people pass by like ghosts. The ticket in his pocket was for a flight back to New York. Back to the quiet apartment with its faded photographs and unopened letters. Back to the life he had suspended long ago. And yet something in him hesitated. The silence inside him, which he had carried for decades like a second skin, had shifted in Vietnam. Visiting the base, touching the cracked earth, and burying Billy's tag had dislodged something deep. A voice, a memory, a promise. He couldn't quite name it. All he knew was that something unfinished still called to him. He took out the envelope Gregory had left, the one marked Final Orders, and flipped it over. There was a line scribbled hastily on the back in red ink, one he hadn't noticed until now. If you ever feel like running again, go to the mountain. Albert stared at it for a long time. The mountain. He knew what it meant. In hollow. It wasn't a place, not really. It was a hidden retreat in the Adirondacks where he and Gregory, after the war, had gone once to find peace, or the illusion of it. A cabin untouched by time, wrapped in fog and pine needles and the occasional deer trail. No electricity, no noise, just firelight and the crack of old wood. Without a word, he rose from the bench. He walked to the counter and exchanged the ticket. No fanfare, just a nod and a few clicks on the keyboard, and he was headed north instead of west. The drive took hours, winding through narrow roads that cut through forests older than the war, older than pain. It rained halfway there. Not a violent downpour, but a gentle, persistent drizzle that slicked the roads and painted the trees in silver. By the time he arrived at the base of Pine Hollow, the fog had descended, thick and low like breath against glass. He hiked the last mile. Each step was slower now, his joints protesting, lungs burning from the cold air. But there was no turning back. Not this time. When he reached the cabin, it looked exactly as it had 50 years ago. The door creaked open with a soft groan, and dust swirled in the amber light from the lantern he lit. The fireplace was still there, the rocking chair, the old map tacked to the wall. On the table, impossibly, sat a bottle of scotch, half full, and 2 glasses. One had dust. The other didn't. Albert froze. There was no logical explanation. No one had known he was coming. And yet the second glass was clean, as if someone had been waiting, or hoping. He sat down slowly, poured 2 drinks, set one across from himself. He didn't speak for a long time, just stared into the fire, letting the warmth pull the ache from his bones. Then softly he began to talk. About Gregory, about Daniel, about Billy, about the screams that never left, and the laughter he missed more than his own name. He talked about Helen, and the time she made him promise to come back in one piece. He talked about the silence after the war, and the silence after her death, and how the two sometimes felt the same. And then he talked to God. Not in the church way, not with bowed head or folded hands, but like a man who has nothing left to lose, and still dares to hope someone somewhere is listening. "Don't let them be forgotten," he said. "Don't let it end with me." The wind outside picked up, whispering through the trees like voices caught in the branches. The flames danced higher, and for a moment, just a moment, Albert felt something beside him. Not seen, not heard, but felt. The weight of another presence. Familiar, solid, forgiving. He raised his glass. To the ones who didn't make it. And then, as the fire crackled and the night settled into stillness, something inside him let go. Not in pain, not in regret, in peace. And somewhere deep in the woods, where the fog never lifted and the stars blinked like old eyes, the world stopped again. But this time, it didn't break him. This time it held him. The morning air was crisp and still, holding a quiet reverence that seemed almost sacred as Albert Moore stepped onto the grounds of the small Veterans Memorial nestled at the edge of the town square. The monument was simple, a granite slab etched with countless names, each one a testament to lives once vibrant, now silent. Albert's fingers traced the cold, rough surface as if trying to touch the souls behind the letters. The wind carried the faint scent of pine and freshly cut grass, mingling with a distant murmur of voices gathering for the ceremony. It was the day to honor those forgotten, the nameless heroes whose sacrifices had been swallowed by time and shadow. Albert's heart tightened with a weight that was both familiar and unbearable. He thought of Billy Myers, young and full of dreams, cut down before he could say goodbye. He thought of Daniel Reyes, still trapped in his silent prison, and Gregory's steadfast courage that had kept them all tethered to hope. And he thought of himself, the old soldier who had wandered through decades carrying their stories locked inside him like precious, fragile treasures. Today he would finally share those stories. Not for glory, but for remembrance. For justice to those who never asked for medals or parades, only the simple dignity of being remembered. As the crowd grew, Albert noticed faces of all ages, veterans with medals pinned to their jackets, families clutching photographs, children wide-eyed in the presence of history. The ceremony began with a hush, A moment of silence that stretched and folded like a prayer, before the first speaker's voice rose steady and clear, weaving words of gratitude and sorrow, of valor unspoken and battles unseen. Albert's gaze drifted to the flagpole, where the stars and stripes fluttered weakly in the gentle breeze, the folds of fabric seeming to carry the weight of every sacrifice. When his turn came, Albert stepped forward slowly, cane tapping softly against the pavement. His voice, though weathered, held the gravity of 1,000 unspoken stories. He spoke of the jungle nights where death lurked in every shadow, of the friends who fell silently in the mud, and of the brotherhood forged in the crucible of fear and hope. He spoke of the wounds invisible to the eye, the battles fought long after the guns had gone silent, and the ghosts that never truly left. Tears glistened on cheeks not far from him, young and old alike, moved not only by his words but by the weight they carried, the unvarnished truth of sacrifice that too often faded into obscurity. Albert told of the dog tag he had carried for decades, worn and bent, a symbol of a young life lost and never forgotten. He laid it gently on the base of the monument, a quiet offering to the past and a promise to the future. The crowd bowed their heads as a bugle played taps, the haunting melody folding over the gathering like a benediction. In that moment, the air was thick with memory and loss, but also with a fierce pride, an unyielding testament that no hero would ever truly be nameless again. Albert felt a lightness he hadn't known in years, a fragile peace blooming from the shared recognition of pain and honor. As the sun climbed higher, casting warm golden light over the stones and the faces turned skyward, Albert stood a little taller. The weight of silence was lifted, replaced by a chorus of voices carrying the legacy of those who had given everything. And in the quiet aftermath, amid the gentle rustling of leaves and the soft murmur of grateful hearts, the nameless heroes found their voice at last, echoing not only through the granite and the ceremony, but forever in the hearts of those who remembered.